Hey, what's up? Hello, everyone. Welcome into Fantasy Filmball, the show where we turn movies into sports and sports into something we don't talk about here. My name is Matt.
My name is Dyl. Thank you for joining us for our 2024 Best Picture Revisiting series, where we are diving into all 10 nominees, talk about their nominations, their snubs, and our overall thoughts with the films. And as always, we're going to be welcoming in a guest. And today I think is a really fun one. As you see, we all came dressed for the occasion. We are going to bat some people in favor, some people against Anatomy of a Fall.
And I want to welcome in Arnaud, our resident Anatomy of a Fall guy. Whenever we talk about this movie on the channel, you seem to be here. So really happy to have you to chat about this movie, which I know is one of your favorites of the year.
Yeah, well, if you don't count Close Your Eyes as a film from this year, I think Anatomy of a Fall might actually be my favorite film of the year. So I'm probably the right guy to come on.
I just want to do a moment of cross-promotion here. Arnaud has a really great video series, if you speak French, really great video series out there talking about the best films of the year as well as best scenes of the year and many other things, honorable mentions about scores and just lots of really great deep cuts that are in there, films that have not released stateside yet. Arnaud is quite the cinema connoisseur, so definitely go and check. It's on YouTube, right?
It's on Instagram.
Oh, on Instagram. Okay.
I'll tag it down.
It'll
be in the bio.
We'll drop the link and everything. It's a great video series. So if you speak French and you want some good cinema recommendations, Arnaud is your guy. But let's get right into Anatomy of a Fall. We're going to start with the Best Picture category, where obviously it's here. Oh my goodness. It's in Best Picture. Why are we talking about it? It's in Best Picture. And let's start off here with the question posed in the video title. Can Anatomy of a Fall win Best Picture? Because I'm starting to think sliver of a chance.
Yeah, Arnaud, you're our guest. Let's hear the expert. What does the expert think about Anatomy?
The answer is no.
You don't even think that there's a little bit of a...
The explanation is Oppenheimer. In a year without Oppenheimer, I would even say like in a year with Everything Everywhere All at Once, it might have a sliver of a chance. In a year that is closer to like 2019, where we had Parasite, 1917, some other films, it's that kind of film that, could sneak in when there's not like a juggernaut. But this year we have a juggernaut. And when you have a juggernaut, nothing else can go against it. That's the kind of year we're in.
I just want to put forward what I'm thinking about lately, which is the possibility of Oppenheimer not winning BAFTA, which by the time this video comes out, we're going to know what happened at BAFTA. So maybe this is all useless, but what if Anatomy wins BAFTA? What if Sandra Hüller wins Best Actress at BAFTA, becomes a potential upset for the win in that category, and then we have a potential of Anatomy of a Fall taking actress and original screenplay. At that point, do we have to consider it as a potential, or is Oppenheimer really too big, if it lost at BAFTA?
I think regardless of BAFTA, Oppenheimer's winning. I mean, we just talked about in our recent BAFTA predictions that they don't have the best track record. So even if Anatomy does upset, I don't really think it needs anything for the Oscars, but it does show that Anatomy is number 2. It's winning screenplay. It's
Which
not
I believe
holdovers. It's not
right
past lives. Or it's not holdovers. It's not Poor Things. It's not anything like that. It's Anatomy is number 2. But at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters because, like Arnaud said, it's a year for Oppenheimer. It's Oppenheimer's.
So let's just talk general thoughts on the movie now. Now that we've talked about the big question, can it win Best Picture? Answer, probably not. Definitely not. Except I say maybe a tiny little bit of a chance, but definitely not. What do we think about the movie? Arnaud, I'll let you start. You're our guest, and you are probably the highest on the film here. Although Dylan might give you a run for your money on that.
Yeah, so these past few years, I've been kind of a sucker for the Palme d'Or winners. We've had a string of like popular Palme d'Or winners, I suppose, ever since, I would argue, Parasite. And having seen about 18 of the 2023 Cannes competition films, at the moment, this is probably my favorite or my chosen Palme, up there with La Passion de Dodin Bouffant, as I'm sure some of you know. It would be my Palme personally. It's been a really popular worldwide hit too, and a Palme that kind of unites cinephiles and casual viewers, a la Parasite, although, not quite at that level, obviously. I'm really stoked to see a film from our Cannes Parallel Challenge make it this far alongside the Zone of Interest, and that's really cool to see. And I think what really makes the film grow on me more and more is the way that it grapples with stories that we make up, and how that influences the way we see truth and the way we imagine truths to be, and what kind of truths that we wind up deciding on imagining. And there's a definitely a lot more lenses to this film. There's a bit of an extension of that would be the feminist lens of this film, which is to say that the truths that we often imagine are those that we are used to imagining as a society, sometimes as a patriarchal society, and how we can imagine certain women to be monstrous. And that impacts a lot, I think, the way we, as an audience, but also how the audience that surrounds the character in the film start to see her, and the way that she's been living her life without as much of a filter as a lot of women are used to living.
With my first viewing of Anatomy of a Fall, I really adored this courtroom thriller. It kind of just checked off every box of what I wanted, and it left me fully satisfied. And I totally understood why it won the Cannes Film Festival, and it was one of the most buzzy titles of 2023. On this rewatch for our Best Picture Revisiting series, I was really intrigued to see how it would hold up after 4 months. And I have to say, I felt like the pacing was a little bit slower this time. Maybe it was due to me watching at home. It was my rewatch of it, but I didn't find it as engaging on a thrill aspect. But those are my only nitpicks. I think the ensemble here is a masterclass. The performances from top to bottom, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, are phenomenal. I think, kind of backing off of what Arnaud said there, how the film goes about talking about how you perceive a situation, how others perceive you while you are in a situation, which kind of attests to how great this screenplay is, which I'll talk about in a little bit. One other small issue I'll talk about here, again, I love this film, it's one of my favorites of the year, is the cinematography and the editing. Sometimes I think that it is on purpose. There's just times where the camera feels like it's supposed to be a character in the room, where it kind of like whip pans left to right, and it doesn't seem natural, but they don't stick with it throughout. So to me, it kind of took me out a little bit on this viewing, where I'm like, wait, what's going on? Like, there's one sequence where the judge has to walk away and the camera tracks with her, whips away and comes back. I'm like, wait, was that intentional? Like, that seems like it's an error, but they don't stick with it. But that's my only gripe with this film. Other than that, I loved Anatomy of a Fall. On this rewatch, there's so much that I took away even more from my initial viewing. I feel like this is a movie that is obviously thrilling the first time you watch it, because you're on the edge of your seat. What's happening? Is she guilty? Is she innocent? What's all the facts? But on a rewatch, you can really pick up some of the nuances with Sandra Hüller's performance, with Milo's performance as Daniel, and knowing what messy as Snoop does, you're even more in awe of that dog's performance. And honestly, I know animals can't be nominated for Oscars. That dog deserves an Oscar nomination.
I'll come in on a little bit of a lower aspect on this movie. I'm going to start by saying I like this movie a lot. I will have to preface with that because I'm going to be taking the opposite side a lot of the time in this conversation, because I don't love Anatomy of a Fall. I think it is a good movie. I do think it's quite overhyped, and I'm going to be honest, if it didn't have that Oscar buzz, if it didn't have that buzz off of winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes, I would have seen this and thought, yeah, that was fine. That was good. It was good. Moving on. It hasn't stuck with me. I think it's quite good. So before people call me a hater on this, it is not a bad movie. It is a good movie, but I have to be the devil's advocate against the movie because it's probably my 8th or 9th ranked Best Picture movie. If we were to do a preferential ballot here, I'd have it really close to the bottom. And I'm just going to start this by saying, to me, I have a really hard time getting into a courtroom drama movie if the entire time I have no doubt in my mind that this character is meant to be innocent. not one moment in the film do I feel like there is anything else going on. And it's not one of those films where you're meant to know that she's innocent the whole time. It doesn't tell you that up front. It's not like she's fighting for that. It's meant to keep things ambiguous. And the themes, as Arnaud, you were saying earlier, it has to do a lot with what is the truth and how do we define truth? Is truth subjective? Is truth an expression of one person's experience of a series of events? How do we persecute a trial when there are no objective truths? And all of that is really interesting. But I feel like those themes don't really come through as cleanly or as effectively as I'd like them to if it never for a second makes me doubt her innocence. And that's just my biggest problem with the movie. I feel like not only was there not enough evidence to go to trial on, it never for a second made me doubt. And I don't know. That to me is a huge hold up on the film. Justine Trier's direction, on the other hand, I find to be a little bit maudlin. I've seen a couple of her other films, and I do not think she is that fascinating of a filmmaker. It's serviceable material. She does the stuff well, but I never feel like she elevates it, and her dialogue writing, specifically in the fight scene, is what really makes this movie shine at points for me.
While I disagree about the point of it seems like she's innocent the whole time, my first viewing, I was pretty much in the camp that she was guilty until some later revelations come up.
What convinced you that she was guilty?
I wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced, but the signs were pointing to it of the window can't really open like that to fall out unless you're purposely jumping out. We had no reason to believe that he was going to jump out himself at that point. And there was just so many signs going up to it seems very unlikely that he just happened to fall out the window. And the only reason he could have fallen out the window if he was being pushed by his wife, who apparently they had a disagreement with, who also was under the influence, who was also kind of angry at the moment. Obviously, more layers were revealed throughout the film, but at least at the very beginning, that was kind of where I was leaning more towards. But something I will agree with you in is Justine Trier's direction. I think she's a lot better than maybe like you're giving her credit for, but I also don't really agree with the nomination. Like I said before in my opening comment, there's a few choices throughout the film, especially with the camera, that really kind of stick out to me and kind of pull me out of the film. I mentioned the one in the courtroom where it kind of seems like you're supposed to be a viewer, but it's the only time that happens. It just feels very odd and out of pace or out of place. But there's other times too where I'm like, the camera could be in like cooler places at times, and then at other times it's just like you do cool stuff. Why don't we stick with those throughout? And it just felt kind of inconsistent from an eye where like I am enjoying what I'm getting, but at the same time I'm like, the consistency would be appreciated. But again, these are my few nitpicks. As we go on to its other nominations and its snubs, I will sound a lot more positive, since I am very positive with this film. But Arnaud, how do you feel about Trier's? Oh, I'm excited. Let's explode.
You guys are all making interesting points, and I think that the fact that you are noticing this camera work actually kind of whether you like it or not is another thing, but the fact that you are noticing these choices in the camera work does kind of show like that Trier is experimenting with different kind of styles and isn't just going for kind of a very straightforward kind of TV miniseries look like how The Iron Claw was filmed, for example, which I'm not a big fan of, but like the camera, I mean the film is good, but I think I'm really happy to see Trier nominated here, and I've been you got me on record. I did say that she was going. Yep. If there was one women director to be nominated, it would be her and not Gerwig. But it kind of in the same vein as Hamaguchi. She's not like directing in a very kind of flashy, showy way. Her film is not this mega budgeted film that is just a showcase for all this work, and that's kind of like something that I think we do talk about somewhat in Oscar discussions, but I think I really want to hammer in that these days we really value work as quality And to me, that's a bit of a problem. Like, look at all this work that was put into this film. Doesn't that make it amazing, right?
It's like
And
how in the sound category we award most sound and not best sound.
or production design, or costumes, or editing.
Whatever's
or...
most noticeable is often distinguished as the best.
Exactly, and it's really nice to see that for once we have a directing winner that is, or sorry, directing nominee that is nominated for the quality of their work and not the quantity of the work that was done on the production. And I think what Trier is doing incredibly well is that she's kind of taking a thin blue line approach, but transposing it in a fictional setting. Trier is really playing on that. She is doing some of that where she is kind of very briefly filming some of these hypotheses, Samuel falling out the window, or Sandra hitting Samuel over the head, Samuel falling. You do see these kinds of things, never seeing the objective truth that is true. She's also playing with the visual mediums. She is kind of toying between different forms of camera, going, when we go to see the testimony of Daniel, we switch to a digital camera with digital zooms and imperfections. When we see him kind of walking around the house and doing tests, we see these same kind of cameras being used within the trial. As you were mentioning, Dylan, we do have some of these kind of rigid, imperfect camera movements that seem to be kind of just as confused as you, the viewer, are of what's happening as we kind of shoot back to the audience, and we're just kind of left with the silence, kind of trying to guess what is going on when we thought the trial was about to restart. We have a lot of these things going on that are kind of like blending the reality and fiction, and trying to kind of make us, and I find that like incredibly engaging as a viewer, because you are left there just kind of trying to piece out for yourself, how exactly does this mesh with the way I'm seeing the story, or I'm seeing these characters, and how these things are being interpreted by certain people. I think the reason why the argument scene is so effective is because you are in this public space, kind of being exposed to something that is of the order of the private and of the intimate, and it's kind of disturbing to see a room of a bunch of people who aren't supposed to be hearing this scene being able to hear this scene, and you see it in their faces right after the recording, and it's like, and the trial just kind of moves along, and you have these kinds of scenes that are just like really, really like almost jaw-dropping in their sobriety, but their ultimate effectiveness. And all of these, not to mention, the way the film was cast and the way the actors were directed, just make for something that is just like actually pitch perfect.
I wish I could see it the way that you do. I agree with you fully when you say that, it's great to see a director nominated for doing subtle work, for not just, blowing things up and being totally in your face, flashy about their direction. It's the complete counterpoint of Yorgos Lanthimos, for example, which is maximalist direction. I love that she's nominated for that reason. I think it's a cool sign that the Academy is continuing to change. I just don't see a lot of the things that you see in this film, and I'll admit that, I think what you're saying is incredibly engaging, incredibly fascinating. I'm sure I would love the film the way that you do if I was seeing it in the film, but I just don't.
While Justine Trier did get nominated for directing, she's probably going to win original screenplay. And I guess to kick things off with a screenplay discussion, I really enjoy how this film bounces between English and French throughout the show, the disconnect between Sandra and like everyone around her. Because I think Anatomy of a Fall sparks so many discussions, especially like whether or not she did it. But at the end of the day, I don't really think that matters. I think what matters most is kind of something Arnaud has been touching on throughout. It's how people act in situations like these. Regardless if someone is innocent or guilty, they're going to try to make themselves seem like they're in the brightest light possible. We see that with Sandra, where she may not have anything to hide, but she continuously tries to hide anything that could make her look guilty throughout. The bruise, what she was actively doing during the act, various little things, stuff that she may have said during the day of, the loudness of her voice. It's always, this stuff isn't making you guilty, but other people could see it as guilt. And we see this from the prosecutor as well, where you can take any moment from someone's life and try to spin it as negatively as possible. We see little conversations taken out of context. We see prescription medicine being lifted up even more, trips to a psychiatrist, even little passages in your book, which I have to say makes complete no sense of how that's allowed in a courtroom, but I loved every second of it, and I just loved how much the prosecutor was just ripping into them throughout. And we see this with Daniel as well, where he's willing to maybe stretch the truth potentially a little bit, exaggerate a certain situation to make stuff look in a certain way to a different group of people. I think if we remove the murder trial from this movie, it's kind of applicable in like everyday life to all three of us and people watching this video, because like there's certain actions, white lies, phrases that you may say on a day-to-day basis, and you have to think about how does someone else really interpret what you're saying and what outcome may they spark. And Anatomy of a Fall, as I said before, it's no longer like a 10 out of 10 for me. I still really enjoy this, and I think the script is why it's one of the strongest of our Best Picture lineup this year.
The script is definitely the strongest factor of the film for me. And I've said before, and I said earlier in the video, the courtroom stuff doesn't work for me. What I love is the marital relationship, and that's what I think this film shines at, is developing this, even without seeing the husband for the majority of the film, we get such a clear picture. We get such a clear picture of what their marriage is like. We understand their conflicts, their trials, their tribulations, the things that cause tension between them. And ultimately, I don't think this is a very compelling murder trial movie. What I do think this is a compelling trial movie is it is a trial of a marriage. It is putting every aspect of these people's lives on trial, putting it under fire, and seeing where the culpability lies. It's not about whether she is to blame directly for his death. In my opinion, it is much more about how much responsibility she has to bear for the misery that he felt in his life. How much do any of us, especially in relationships, how much impact do we have on our partner's lives, on their happiness, on what they do or do not do with their lives? And to me, that's the fascinating part of this film, is looking at this toxic marriage through the lens of an actual trial. It doesn't matter whether she did it or not. So let's talk Sandra Hüller. I mean, she is obviously a force to be reckoned with, and probably, I think, honestly, a major part of the reason why this film has become such a huge international success. Her performance is so grounded and captivating, and I really do believe, I really do believe that her towering performance has helped carry this film to these Oscar nominations. When the film first premiered at Cannes, and we were talking about it as maybe an Oscar contender, we were all saying, oh, well, Sandra Hüller gets actress, and then maybe if that happens, the film could sneak in some other places. So it all started with Sandra Hüller. I want to know from you guys, what are some of your standout moments in her performance, and what makes this performance work for you?
I think Sandra Hüller is really great in this film. I said during our Zone of Interest episode, I feel like she should have been double nominated this year with this and Zone of Interest. I think both of those performances are so different, but they're really, really doing well at what they're supposed to do. I know both of y'all were more on she was innocent the whole time. I thought the way she was able to perform, was she guilty? Was she innocent? Where it wasn't very clear. I know Justine Triet said, act as if you are innocent. But to me, as a viewer, I kind of felt like there's times where she's acting like she's on both sides of the fence. And I feel like those aspects were very much masterful, for a lack of terms. But in terms of specific moments throughout the film, I really did like the moments of humanity that we got, where she's talking with her lawyer or talking with Daniel, where there's nothing really serious going on. It's just her being a mom, her being a friend, her just wanting to have fun and have a nice drink or go out to dinner. Like those moments really add to make this feel like a real character. It wasn't like, oh, this is some superhuman who's on trial who has the perfect thing to say in every moment. Like, she says the wrong thing a lot of the times, and it makes this performance feel so much more down to earth, which I feel like very much in other hands, this performance could be so through the roof, where those moments where it burst go into the point of like overdoing it, but I never felt that with Sandra Hüller throughout this film. I always felt like she nailed the right tone regardless of the scenes. And just to mention one additional one, I think the opening is really, really great in terms of her performance, where you just get this feel of she's used to this. Her husband plays the loud noises all the time. She's annoyed, but she really wants to talk to this person. Why does she want to talk? I don't know. Maybe I could read it this way. Maybe I could read it that way. And I think that kind of goes into my initial feelings like, well, I could kind of see both sides because she's playing it where you can kind of see the angles of where the anger could come from, but you can also see where she's just in this situation where it just doesn't really work out for her trying to talk to new people, trying to meet new people, and we see that unfold throughout the rest of the film.
Yeah. And Hüller has kind of like this, has a bit of a glacial tone to her face that is sometimes hard to read. Like you were saying in that opening scene, is she used to this, or is she trying to hide her discomfort and trying to keep, you know, this kind of a warm attitude with this with the guest that she has in front of her? It's not always evident, and sure enough, when we get to the trial, the people around her who have to kind of judge whether she's this person or that person have a difficult time as well. Not to mention that, you know, you have this German actress who is more, you know, more used to speaking English, stuck in this country that is speaking yet another language which she is just not comfortable speaking in. Very early on in the trial, right, she's being asked a specific question and she responds with, "It was not a seduction," and it's like, that's not my question, which makes her look even more guilty, right? Because she's but is that her, you know, acting guilty, or is it just kind of like her not being comfortable in the language she's speaking in? And you can feel that she is aware of this pressure that is being on her during the trial, during as she's doing this performance, and speaking to other people as they are responding back to her in French. And it's this really interesting kind of like tug of war that's happening with this fantastic performance. We'll talk about it later, but I think that she is, you know, she's my favorite of the 5 nominated, and she is absolutely what makes the film work, but she is not the only performance in the film that makes the film work.
That is a very
messy.
I mean, this ensemble, as I mentioned before, is just stacked from top to bottom, and we'll talk about more of these supporting performances that did not get an Oscar nomination a little bit later on. But Matt, do you have a favorite moment from Sandra Hüller in the film?
Oh, I mean, I've talked so much about that argument scene. I think she's just pitch perfect in that. But something you said there, Arnaud, that I just want to quickly carry on with is, you know, her casting is so perfect, in especially just in picking a German actress in the first place. Germany obviously having sort of a reputation for coldness, for sharpness, for no nonsense. And Sandra Hüller is a performer that has done a lot of roles that are much more comedic. My favorite Sandra Hüller performance is by far her work in Tony Erdmann, which is a masterpiece of a film. And if you haven't seen it, it's wonderful. You gotta watch it.
You could say that her comedic chops comes from her being cold in the face of ridiculousness.
That is very true. But she does that very well. She plays cold, she plays sharp, she plays no nonsense. And ultimately, I think a lot of what makes the performance work inside of the film is that it's also interrogating, as you mentioned earlier, how society sees women and how the court system also the expectations of women in that system, where, you know, is she going to be perceived potentially as more guilty because of a perceived lack of friendliness or lack of niceties that might be more performative in the face of what's going on. And you know,
or because she wasn't willing to, or, you know, a perception would be she wouldn't be willing to let the man be the man of the house.
Yeah, so there's all of these kind of questions going on, and her casting, and just the sharpness of Sandra Hüller, and just her natural mannerisms that come through in the role. So even when she's not acting with a capital A. It's all baked in there because she is the perfect casting for the role. She's just does such a great job of going. She just does such a great job of portraying this woman going through this situation and bringing up these questions of, are people going to perceive her as more guilty because of this coldness that comes across from her? It's really strong work. Not my favorite performance of the ones nominated.
Speaking of being worthy of a nomination, that's going to lead us to the editing of the film, because I really, really like how fast this moves us on. Come on. I feel like there's so many perfect editing moments throughout, especially during that argument scene where the choices that they decide to cut during when they go back to the people in the courtroom, when they leave it in the argument. I feel like that scene is the true feat. Like, if, let's say, editing had a bake-off, that's the moment that you would show off. Some other little editing moments that I very much appreciate on this rewatch was the opening credits, how the music's playing as well as the photos on the beat of the piano. And then with it being an international film that has subtitles throughout the film, I sometimes struggle with keeping up with faster paced films. Like, I know Drive My Car is not a fast paced movie, but it's fast paced dialogue where I found myself sometimes not keeping up with the dialogue before it cut to the next scene, where here, even though they're speaking very fast, I was able to keep up with dialogue throughout the editing, which I know that's not real editing. Maybe that's editing later down the fact, but I found that to be something I very much appreciate, especially when this time around watching at home.
I want to hear your explanation of the editing, Arnaud, because you called this nomination really early, and I want to give you major props for that, because I think it was early on, a couple of critics groups gave Anatomy of a Fall editing awards, and you went, that's happening. This is happening. Watch out. And I went, absolutely not. What the hell are you talking about, Arnaud? You are just being way too hopeful for Anatomy of a Fall. And then it happened. So I want to hear from you. What makes this editing worthy of a nomination?
Yeah, well, I'll say that there's always, like, every year, there's always, like, kind of a more artsy, for the lack of a better word, kind of editing nomination that I'm usually able to predict. I called pretty early that Power of the Dog was going to be nominated for editing, because as I was watching that film, I saw some very distinctive and interesting editing choices, even if the film was not that fast-paced. So, there are these kinds of... there's usually kind of a slot for this kinds of things, unless you're 2018 and it's just all garbage. But that was a special year. As far as why this deserves the nomination, I already talked in my elegy of the cinematography, in just how I love how the film switches between visual mediums and how it plays along these kinds of things. But further kind of pushing that, I just love the way the editing is used to kind of show us a very specific point of view. There are very obvious choices, whether that's in the courtroom or in other scenes, that show the point of view. Usually the camera, not literally from, the view of the eyes of a character, but it's usually framed and edited in a way to show a certain point of view at a certain given time. It's not always Sandra's. It can be another character. It can be Daniel. It can be the person at the stand. I'm thinking, for example, the first trial scene, the young student who is at the beginning of the film, played by Camille Rutherford, is at the stand, and she's asking, the trial is kind of continuing, and she asks the judge to please call her madam and not miss. She doesn't want to be denigrated to a marital status. And instead of cutting to her as she says it, in a kind of act of taking a stance a little bit, we just keep holding on the shot, which is essentially just the prosecutor and the judge blurred out in the background. And once the interaction is finished, we just see a little smile from the prosecutor, who is just almost like who almost chuckles at the fact that they were wasting time a little bit with this interaction. There are these kinds of choices that I find fascinating. The opening scene is a great example of this too, where you are very limited in what you are being shown until like much later into the scene. We just start with just a bunch of close-ups, and what I think that does is that you as an audience member are just focusing on the faces and the content of the conversation and not so much the details around them, because and those details are kind of revealed a little bit more later into the film as that scene is being dissected by the procedural by the procedure of the court. And there's a lot of these kinds of decisions that maybe are invisible or maybe are not as noticeable, but that really that really give a lot of meaning, I think, to the themes of the film. And just the fact that, you know, it's one of these films that that only cuts when it's necessary, but that still manages to keep a very tight pace, one that consistently engages you from start to finish. And that's always something that is admirable. So when they actually manage to do that. So, you know, to me, the editing was like a bit of a no-brainer. Like, in my personal opinion, it wasn't a given to be nominated for the Oscar. I'm just really happy they actually recognized it, especially given that this is a foreign film and it's not like they've known this editor. You know, this editor works in France. They are not known within the Hollywood system. So the international branch or the editing bodies really just pulled out a favor for this film.
Mm. Yeah, you said tight-paced. I appreciate all the explanation there. I disagree with the tight pace. I still see this as a 2.5-hour movie that really feels like a 1 hour, 45-minute movie. And to me, the pace, it doesn't drag necessarily, but I really feel like there is stuff that could have been tightened. There is stuff that could have been cut out, and maybe it would have lessened the overall impact of a lot of the things that you're talking about. But I don't know. To me, it is not a lean film, and that's by design, but I just don't love the editing. It's fine, it's serviceable, but I don't know. I have a hard time justifying an editing nomination for a film that feels too long, in my opinion.
So if we look at the César Awards, which is the French Oscars, you know, they only consider films that are within the Francophone sphere. Mostly French films, like even Quebec films, for example, are not really considered within that body of work. So mostly films that were produced within the country of France. And you can see that Anatomy of a Fall was nominated for 11 categories. It was nominated for the 5 categories that was nominated at the Oscars and 6 additional categories. Those categories are two nominations for supporting actor, which is for Swan Arnaud and Antoine Renats. 1 nomination for male revelation, which is, of course, Milo Machado Grainer. 1 nomination for sound, for cinematography, and for production design. The only category within those 6 that, you know, I don't particularly feel passionate about is production design. I think it is good production design, but it's not production design that I'm like, wow, that made the film what it is. You know what I mean?
A category that's not there but is at the Oscars is international feature, where France didn't select Anatomy of a Fall. So I asked Lucas last episode for Zone of Interest if Anatomy was selected, what would win? And I think all 3 of us there agreed it would have been Anatomy, but Zone possibly could have stood a chance. So now my question to you, Arnaud, I feel like I know the answer. Who would win if they were head-to-head? And do you think if Anatomy was submitted, would Zone still be in an international contender? Because Matt and I both gave our points last episode, where I felt like just because of how weak this year was, number 11 was so far off, Zone could have still gotten in. Would have had our first double international in Best Picture. But I know Matt was a little bit more hesitant, but still did agree.
Yeah. Isn't it unfortunate that we could have had the first year to ever have like 2 Best Picture nominees in the international category, and we're not gonna be able to see the fruit of that labor, I guess. But yeah, like Zone of Interest is winning international right now. If Anatomy was nominated, it's winning. There's just I don't see an outcome like Zone of Interest is always going to have its haters, or at least the people who are just left cold from the film, whereas Anatomy has a lot more passion. It's a lot more accessible. Again, it's the kind of film that just is able to unite cinephiles and more amateur viewers, I guess, or you know, less experienced cinema enjoyers, I suppose. So it's just the perfect match for this kind of for the winner in that kind of category.
You mentioned some nominees that Anatomy did get at that award show, but at the Oscars, no supporting performances nominated. And I mean, the biggest snub most people would say is Milo Machado-Graner. He's great. I think he's great. But if I were to give a supporting actor performance, it would not be to him. It would be to Anton Rensard. I know I did not say that right. Arnaud, drop the correct pronunciation.
Renat.
There we go. I think he stole every scene that he was in. He has some of my favorite line readings of the year, even if without the subtitles I don't know what he's saying. I just feel like he devoured every moment. He stole every scene, and I could truly just listen to him grill Sandra for an entire film and still walk away like ecstatic. But Milo's great. I think he's deserving of almost every youth performance prize that could be out there, and I think his final monologue really leaves an impact after both viewings. It's one of the things that you most take away from the film, at least for me.
Here's the thing. There are three reasons why these actors, these three supporting actors that were nominated at the Césars, weren't even like remotely considered for the Oscars. Number one is that Renat and Machado-Grainer's roles are both 100% in French, and Arnaud is like maybe like 50-50, whereas Sandra Hüller is like 95% English. Number two is that these three are complete unknowns for nearly all audiences in the US, whereas Hüller, has Zone this year, right, which is an Oscar contender nominated for Best Picture, and for the more like international / fans of art house cinema, they probably already knew her, especially for Toni Erdmann, which was an Oscar nominee a few years back. So the viewers who were keen on watching all the nominated films in 2017 will have known Sandra Hüller, even if it was in the back of their minds. And number three is that Neon put all their chips on Sandra and made her the centerpiece of the campaign, and perhaps for the reasons above. Yeah, I agree, Dylan. I think Renat is fantastic in that role. And I've heard a few people say that he's cartoonish or over the top, and I think they're just completely they're not realizing just how committed and how dramatic the act of a prosecutor is to begin with. A process is theater, and he is a theater actor and he is acting like it, and he is doing such a great job at it because you can tell that the character is convinced. He really is convinced that the person in front of her murdered her husband, and he is trying to grill her and catch her at every slip up, and you can tell that this is important for him, if only in the context of this procedural theater. And but then I would, if I had to pick a favorite within that pack, it would absolutely have to be Milo Machado-Graner, which is like borderline a co-lead of the film, frankly, in just how pivotal he is to the film. To like, if we're talking about how this film, it talks about interpretations of truth and all that, he is the character who is going through that arc. He's a very bright kid, and he's the one who at the beginning is convinced that he is going to find the truth. He is going to understand what has happened. We tell him, you can't understand. He's like, but I have to understand. And it's only at the end where he realizes that it's not about understanding. It's about deciding what truth you believe in. And he's the one going on that character arc, whereas Sandra Hüller is on the defense, and she's the one who has to prove that her marriage was stable, that her marriage was healthy, despite the hardships that she was going through, and that and she has to, if you believe that she's innocent, she has to fight back the preconceived notions about her character and about her place in society.
I'll say I think that Messi was snubbed. He's a good boy.
I agree.
I think he should win an Oscar for goodest boy.
I said at the beginning, I think that if there was a category for animals, sweep, best winner of all time. And when we have our personal ballots, who knows? Maybe Messi would be
better winner.
There was multiple EOs. There was only one. There was only one Messi.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's
I don't
hard to
know.
say. It's hard to say because you would have to nominate 6 donkeys. You know, you can't. They're not like it's not just one donkey. Whereas here it's one doggo, and damn if that's not the best doggo performance I've seen maybe in my life. The Oscars are adding the casting category, which will only take in effect in 2 years. But honestly, I could see this film having a 6th nomination through that
Yeah.
category.
Oh,
Yeah, I could
I fully
absolutely see
agree. I mean, y'all talked about casting Sandra Hüller, who is perfect for this role. Then you find a youth unknown. Then you're pulling people who are maybe prominent in France, but not really anywhere else. And then I honestly think casting animals may become something if they're integral to the story, just like this. But that's going to bring us to what I think is one of the most cool parts about these episodes. We bring on guests. We get to hear how they rank the Best Picture nominees. And Arnaud, before we begin, have you seen all 10 films?
I have seen all 10 films. I have not seen all of them necessarily more than once. And there's definitely at least one of these that I would probably like to rewatch before giving a final assessment, but I will do so anyways. So, whatever.
I can probably guess what your number 10 is, but people out there may not know what your number 10 is. So let's start at the bottom and work our way up. What is number 10 on Arnaud's preferential ballot?
So I know that almost everybody who's come on here has said that we have a pretty exceptional, Best Picture field this year, and I will echo that almost entirely. There is one exception. I think all of these films are at least good, except for one film, which I think is just mid, which is American Fiction. That would be bottom of the
In the
ballot.
basement. In the basement.
We gotta talk about that sometimes.
It's a failed Ruben Östlund film that can't commit to its etchiness, and even when it does try to be structurally inventive in focusing on family drama and kind of just showing that in the same way that maybe The Deer Hunter would show an entire marriage before getting into the film, instead of feeling interesting, noteworthy, or unique, it's just kind of copy-pasted from TV soap operas. Well, my number 9 on the ballot would be Maestro, which I think is a film that shines in moments, but that isn't cohesive as a whole. Or actually, well, it is kind of cohesive, but it isn't particularly original or interesting as a whole. I think the marriage drama in Anatomy just completely just shatters everything that is being attempted and written in Maestro, which is the most kind of like bland, regurgitated marriage kind of presentation of a marriage on film that I've seen in a while, which is too bad because there's a lot of good in this film, and it's on the backbone of some flimsy concept. Number 8 and 7, it's a toss up, but I'm gonna say 8 is Barbie and 7 is Oppenheimer. It's really a toss up though. I do think they're both good movies. I don't think they're amazing movies. I'm really happy to have seen Barbenheimer take shape. That's really cool to see. Although I'm a little, disappointed that I'm not in love with these films. As far as Oppenheimer is concerned, it's unfortunate for me, I guess, that I don't find the eventual Best Picture winner to be more than just good, especially since there are some Christopher Nolan films that I think are amazing.
You took my next point where I understand, while I love Oppenheimer, I can understand where people are upset because I liked everything ever all at once, but do I think it should have swept everything? Maybe not, even though I really did enjoy that film as well. So I fully get from people who really would not like everything ever or really wouldn't like Oppenheimer. Like, oh my gosh, you're really going to give one movie every award? And sometimes that may not be fun, but sometimes it does benefit you. But what is going to be your number 6?
Yeah, I will also say that Oppenheimer is the key film that I would like to rewatch at least another time to really have a proper assessment, because frankly, I found the last hour of the film just very uninteresting, and just kind of poorly paced. Going into what I think are the great films, this was very difficult, but at number 6, I'm putting Past Lives. I think it's a really, really strong concept. I think there are a lot of great scenes within the film. I think the scene between Nora and her husband in the bed is one of the most touching scenes I've seen in a while. It's a really interesting examination of Bond's of bonds and relationships in a kind of love triangle that we haven't really, that's kind of original, that we haven't really seen exactly before. I've said this before, but I just wish that they had gone a little further into the ending and pushed and opened the envelope just a little bit further, and pushed the concept just to make it like a little, like, push the emotion just a little bit further. At number 5, I have The Holdovers. I think it's a really, really well executed film that is just like really well written for what it is. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it works like a charm. Number 4, I have Poor Things, which I think is a really, really strong film, an aesthetically unique and kind of breathtaking experience as you take it in. There are some hilarious moments. I love just how adventurous it is in its storytelling, and it has just a fantastic ensemble as well. After that, we get into the masterpiece zone, and at number 3, I have The Zone of Interest, and at number 2, I have Killers of the Flower Moon. Those are for me, the two kind of big films about the banality of evil, if you will, of this year. And I think they both explore these things incredibly, incredibly well and in an incredibly sophisticated way. I think Zone of Interest is the more original and the more groundbreaking film. Absolutely. There are a few things within this very original proposition, very few things that I'm still kind of grappling with, and I'm still kind of questioning, that I'm still not sure exactly whether or not that was the right way to do this kind of film. And that's why, in part, I think that Killers, while it's a much more classic way of filmmaking, Martin Scorsese still takes a very kind of sober way of filmmaking in the way he shoots his dialogue scenes and the way he winds up kind of showcasing this breed of violence and this organization, the way this kind of like mob mentality was organized in order to eradicate a wealthy indigenous people. And I think that the way he explores this is absolutely brilliant, in the same way that we follow the perpetrators of violence in The Zone of Interest as well. And of course, at number 1, I have Anatomy of a Fall, which is one of my favorite films of the year, and one of the films that has made me really rethink this year about how you can represent a kind of almost naturalistic thriller on screen.
Very interesting list. You definitely had some placements that I would not expect coming from you. I would have expected Poor Things a little higher, Killers a little lower, but that's the fun of doing these preferential balances. You get to kind of see the actual taste that may divert a little bit from what you expect.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm feeling at the moment. But like I said, maybe on further inspection or as the years go by, I might reevaluate this. But I feel, what I'll say is that I can see maybe some of the films towards the top of the pack move a little bit, but I'm pretty dead set on American Fiction and Maestro being at the bottom.
That brings us to the end of this episode. If you're still watching, make sure you drop a subscription, drop a comment, let us know what you think about Anatomy of a Fall. As always, my name is Matt.
My name is Dyl, that's Arnaud, and this is Fantasy Filmball.